The Invincible franchise has one of the most violent histories in all of comics, and most of it traces back to a single event that happened centuries before Mark Grayson was even born. Today, I'm breaking down every major war in the Invincible universe and everything we know about them, starting with the one conflict that poisoned absolutely everything that came after, the Viltrumite Civil War. The Viltrumites didn't become the most feared species in the galaxy because of some outside threat. They did it to themselves. And honestly, that's the most terrifying part. Here's what happened. Emperor Argal, the ruler of the entire Viltrum Empire, was assassinated by a Viltrumite named Thetis. Now, you'd think the death of an emperor would lead to a normal succession crisis. Maybe some political maneuvering, a couple of power grabs, the usual. But this is Viltrum, so instead it triggered a full-scale civil war, and the people fighting it decided that the best way to resolve their differences was to kill everyone who wasn't strong enough to survive. That's not an exaggeration. The Viltrumite leadership adopted a policy of eugenic purification. The weak would die, the strong would inherit everything. They called it the Great Purge, which is about as subtle as a brick through a window, and it resulted in the extermination of approximately half the total Viltrumite population. Billions wiped out by their own people because they didn't meet the new standard. And here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. It worked. Thrag, who consolidated absolute control over the survivors, emerged with a smaller but incomprehensibly powerful military force. Every single Viltrumite left standing was the apex of their species. No dead weight, no dissent, just a unified army of warrior elites devoted entirely to galactic conquest. The paradox is almost elegant in how horrible it is. They cut their population in half and became stronger for it. Genocide as self-improvement. Cool, that's also a thing that happened. This is the original sin of the entire Invincible series. Every war, every invasion, every act of Viltrumite brutality that follows traces directly back to the ideology born in this purge. Thrag's breeding program centuries later, where he forcibly fathered an army of half-Viltrumite children, same philosophy, different victims. The idea that strength is the only value worth preserving never died. It just kept finding new ways to express itself. But if you think a civilization destroying itself from the inside is bad, wait until you see what happens when an entire dimension decides Earth looks like easy real estate. The Flaxan invasions. Imagine fighting someone, winning, and then finding out they just got 20 years to study everything you did wrong. That's the Flaxan problem. The Flaxans are an alien species from an alternate dimension where time moves dramatically faster than it does on Earth. We're talking minutes here, equaling years over there. Which means every single time Earth's heroes repelled an invasion, the Flaxans went home, licked their wounds, and had literal decades to prepare a better one. That's not a military disadvantage for Earth. That's a nightmare. The first invasion was pure brute force. The Flaxans materialized directly into a populated city and started killing everything in sight. Zero negotiation, zero demands, just immediate wholesale slaughter of civilians. Invincible and the teen team managed to push them back through their portal, and for about 5 minutes, everyone felt pretty good about themselves. Here's the thing. Those 5 minutes on Earth, that was years in Flaxan space. Years of analyzing how Invincible fights, how the teen team coordinates, what weapons Earth's defenders use, and exactly where the gaps in their defenses are. So when the Flaxans came back the second time, they weren't the same army. They had developed specific technological countermeasures designed to neutralize the exact heroes who beat them last time. And the third invasion was even worse. Each wave was more targeted, more sophisticated, and harder to stop than the last. But here's where it gets interesting. Robot, being the terrifyingly efficient problem solver he is, managed to reverse engineer the Flaxan language and identify their critical vulnerability. The Flaxans wore protective bands that shielded them from Earth's temporal framework. Without those bands, Earth's slower time flow caused them to age at an accelerated rate. We're talking decades of aging in seconds. Remove the band, watch a soldier turn to dust before he can pull a trigger, which is, not ideal if you're the soldier, but the real damage from the Flaxan invasions wasn't the body count, it was the realization. Before the Flaxans, Earth existed in comfortable cosmic isolation. Humanity assumed it was alone, or at least unnoticed. 3 interdimensional invasions shattered that assumption permanently. Earth's military and superhero infrastructure had to pivot from reactive defense to constant vigilance against threats they couldn't predict, from dimensions they didn't know existed. The Flaxans taught humanity a lesson it never forgot. The universe was watching, and some of it wanted them dead. But if interdimensional invaders with time manipulation sound bad, wait until you hear about the parasitic hive mind that successfully conquered an entire planet before setting its sights on Earth. The Sequid invasion. Most threats in Invincible can be solved by hitting something hard enough. The Sequids are the terrifying exception. Here's the setup. A parasitic hive mind species with zero individual intelligence latches onto a host, and suddenly they're coordinated, strategic, and absolutely relentless. Their first big move was taking control of astronaut Russ Livingston. One human brain plugged into millions of parasites, and just like that, the Sequids had a general. They broke containment almost immediately, and then they took Mars. Not a city on Mars, not a region, the entire planet, the Martians, an advanced alien civilization with superhuman capabilities and infrastructure that dwarfed anything on Earth, were conquered and enslaved. Their cities, their technology, their autonomy, all subjugated by creatures that look like they belong stuck to the bottom of a tide pool, which is, not ideal, but here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. The Sequids didn't win because they were stronger than the Martians. They won because strength doesn't matter against a hive mind. You can punch one Sequid into paste, and there are a million more operating with the exact same intelligence, the exact same strategy, adapting in real time. Every Sequid that attaches to a new host makes the collective smarter. It's a biological snowball rolling downhill, and Mars was just the first thing it flattened. Invincible and the Guardians of the Globe eventually intervened to free the Martians from Sequid control, but that wasn't the end of it. Earth was next on the menu. The response required something Invincible's world had never really pulled off before: genuine cross-factional cooperation. The Guardians of the Globe, the Teen Team, and conventional military forces all had to work together because no single hero could punch their way through a distributed alien consciousness. Robot ultimately devised a specialized neural severing device that could break the link between the Sequid collective and their primary host, cut the connection to Livingston's brain, and the millions of parasites revert to mindless organisms. Clever, but also a horrifying admission that the only way to beat this enemy was brain surgery under combat conditions. The Sequids were stopped, but the psychological damage was permanent. Earth now understood, with absolute certainty, that it existed in a universe containing multiple hostile civilizations capable of overwhelming entire planets. The Viltrumites were scary because of raw power. The Flaxans were scary because they kept coming back. The Sequids were scary because they represented a problem that couldn't be solved with fists, and in a universe built entirely around people solving problems with fists, that's the most unsettling thing imaginable. But if you think a parasitic hive mind conquering Mars is bad, wait until 16 evil versions of Mark Grayson show up on Earth simultaneously. The Invincible War. Angstrom Levy was a good man. That's what makes this so much worse. Before the disfigurement, before the insanity, Levy was a pacifist scientist who genuinely wanted to help people across multiple dimensions. He could travel between alternate realities, and his entire goal was to use that power for good. Then, Mark Grayson happened. During a confrontation, Levy was horrifically disfigured, and his mind was flooded with memories from hundreds of alternate universe versions of himself. And here's the thing about those memories. Many of those alternate Levys had witnessed their world's versions of Invincible become violent, tyrannical monsters, mass murderers, wearing Mark's face. So now you've got a formerly peaceful man carrying the collective trauma of hundreds of realities where the guy who ruined his life is also the worst thing that ever happened to everyone else. His brain basically ran a highlight reel of every evil Invincible across the multiverse on loop until the original Angstrom Levy was buried under it all. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Levy's revenge plan was elegant in the worst possible way. He recruited 18 evil Invincible variants from across the multiverse, each one a version of Mark who had chosen violence over heroism. His pitch was simple: help me destroy Mark Grayson's Earth, and I'll give you alternate realities to rule. Every single one said yes. The variants struck simultaneously across the globe: New York, Moscow, Hong Kong, Sydney, Los Angeles, Chicago. 18 Invincible-level threats hitting major population centers at the same time with zero restraint. Earth's heroes responded, but they weren't winning. They were surviving. The Guardians of the Globe, the Global Defense Agency, every available superhuman on the planet threw themselves into the fight, and the best they could manage was slowing the assault down. These are the people who've beaten alien invasions and interdimensional armies, and they were getting absolutely steamrolled. The casualties exceeded hundreds of thousands. Entire metropolitan areas were flattened. The single deadliest event in human history within the series, and it lasted 3 days. 3 days of uninterrupted devastation from beings who each individually could have conquered a country. But here's where it gets dark in a completely different way. After the war ended, ended, the Global Defense Agency collected the corpses of the fallen evil Invincibles and repurposed them into reanimate, undead biological weapons. They took the bodies of dead alternate reality marks and turned them into remote-controlled zombie soldiers, stockpiled for the Viltrumite confrontation everyone knew was coming. They were recycling dead gods into puppets. Levy himself got betrayed by his own recruits. The surviving variants tried to seize his dimensional technology for themselves, because of course they did. You don't recruit 18 evil versions of the most powerful hero on Earth and expect loyalty. Levy responded by banishing the remaining variants to a desolate wasteland universe, stranding them permanently. And if you think the Invincible War pushed Earth to its breaking point, wait until you hear what happened when the actual Viltrumites showed up. The Viltrumite War. This is the one. The war the entire series had been building toward since page 1, and it is exactly as devastating as you'd expect. The Viltrumite War spanned issues 71 through 78 and represented the coalition of planets' coordinated all-or-nothing stand against centuries of Viltrumite conquest. Every subjugated world, every enslaved species, every civilization that had been crushed under Viltrum's boot finally had a chance to fight back. And the coalition didn't show up empty-handed. They brought 2 weapons specifically designed to do the impossible: kill Viltrumites. The first was the Infinity Ray, a devastating energy weapon derived from Space Racer's technology. This thing could punch through Viltrumite durability like it wasn't even there. The second weapon was far worse: the Scourge Virus, a bioweapon engineered by Thetis himself using his own genetic material as the foundation. A Viltrumite killing plague built by a Viltrumite traitor from Viltrumite DNA, which is, poetic in the most horrifying way possible. Here's the thing about the Scourge Virus. It didn't just weaken the Viltrumites. It killed approximately 99.9% of the remaining population. Let that number sit for a second. A species that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, that had conquered entire solar systems with small squads of warriors, was reduced to fewer than 50 adult survivors. That's not a military defeat. That's near extinction. But the virus wasn't even the war's most iconic moment. That belongs to the destruction of Viltrum itself. Mark Grayson, Omni-Man, and their allies flew into the planet's core and ignited it. The homeworld of the Viltrumite Empire, the seat of their civilization for millennia, the place where they'd built their entire identity as the galaxy's supreme conquerors, was reduced to cosmic debris, gone. Just floating rocks where a planet used to be. And then there's Thetis. Here's where it gets genuinely tragic. Thetis was the man who started everything. He assassinated Emperor Argal to free the galaxy from Viltrumite tyranny. He founded the coalition of planets to organize resistance. He created the Scourge Virus to finish the job. Every single domino that led to this war was one he personally pushed over, and he never saw the mission completed. Thrag killed him in direct combat during the final confrontation. The architect of the Viltrumites' destruction, murdered by their greatest warrior, moments before his life's work was fulfilled. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. The war's conclusion left fewer than 30 Viltrumites alive. 30. The galaxy's supreme military power, the species that had purged half their own population because they thought weakness was unacceptable, was now literally an endangered species. And every single one of those survivors was fleeing in one direction, toward Earth. So the coalition won. The Empire fell. Viltrum was destroyed. But if you think a cornered, desperate remnant of the most dangerous species in the galaxy quietly accepted their defeat, wait until you hear what happened when the humans started fighting each other. The robot takeover. Every war we've talked about so far has one thing in common. The threat came from somewhere else. Aliens, alternate dimensions, parasitic hive minds from Mars. But this one came from the guy who was supposed to be protecting everybody. Rudolph Connors, better known as Robot, was the single most trusted strategic mind on the planet, leader of the Guardians of the Globe, architect of Earth's defense systems. The guy Cecil Stedman personally handed the keys to every security protocol the Global Defense Agency had ever built. And Robot looked at all of that access, all of that trust, and decided the most logical thing to do was conquer the entire world. Here's the thing. Robot didn't snap. He didn't get mind controlled or corrupted by some alien artifact. He sat down, ran the numbers, and genuinely concluded that democratic governance was too inefficient to solve war, disease, and poverty. That centralized authority, his authority, was the only path to saving humanity from itself, which is, not ideal. deal. The coup was surgical. He systematically eliminated the heroes and power structures that could oppose him, deploying his drone constructs against targets with zero warning. He killed members of the Guardians of the Globe, people who had fought beside him, considered him a friend, just erased them like he was crossing names off a grocery list. Cool, that's also a thing that happened. But here's where it gets really dark. Robot had spent years quietly building an army of self-replicating drone constructs, each one expendable, each one replaceable in seconds. World governments looked at the sheer scale of what he'd assembled, an automated military force that could outproduce any conventional army on the planet, and they did the math. Every nation on Earth surrendered. And then there's Cecil. Cecil Stedman had survived alien invasions, interdimensional wars, and the Invincible War. He was the most paranoid, prepared man on the planet, and Robot killed him. The man Cecil had personally mentored, personally given access to every defense system humanity possessed, used that access to execute him. Cecil didn't die fighting some cosmic threat. He died because he believed in the wrong person. It's one of the most tragic deaths in the entire series. Mark tried to stop it. He confronted Robot directly, ready to put him down the old-fashioned way. But Robot had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. For every construct Mark destroyed, 3 more replaced it. Invincible, the guy who'd survived conquest, who'd helped destroy Viltrum itself, was forced to surrender. Earth went from a world protected by superheroes to a totalitarian surveillance state overnight. Automated drone armies patrolled every city. And the worst part? Robot actually made things better. Crime dropped, infrastructure improved, global conflicts ceased. He was right about the results and completely wrong about everything else, which makes him more terrifying than any alien conqueror the series ever produced. Omni-Man wanted to rule Earth because his empire told him to. Thrag wanted to rule because he believed in Viltrumite supremacy. Robot wanted to rule because he had a spreadsheet that said it was optimal. But if you think a dictator with good infrastructure policy is the worst thing that could happen, wait until Thrag builds himself an entire army of half-Viltrumite children and comes back for round 2. The Thrag Coalition War. Most villains lose and disappear. Thrag lost and got worse. After the Viltrumite War left fewer than 30 of his species alive, any rational leader would have surrendered. Thrag is not a rational leader. He's an ideologue. And ideologues don't quit, they adapt. So Thrag took those 30 survivors and executed what might be the single darkest plan in the entire Invincible series. He established a breeding program using captive alien species, fathering an entire army of half-Viltrumite children through systematic sexual slavery, not over months, over years. Dozens and dozens of offspring, each one carrying Viltrumite blood, each one raised from birth as a soldier. Here's the thing. This isn't some random act of cruelty. This is the exact same eugenic philosophy that drove the Great Purge thousands of years earlier, just pointed outward instead of inward. Back then, the Viltrumites killed half their own species because they decided weakness was unacceptable. Now, Thrag was enslaving other species to rebuild what that purge created. Same ideology, different victims. The logical endpoint of believing your genetics are superior to everyone else's is eventually treating every other living thing as raw material, which is, not ideal. Meanwhile, the Coalition of Planets was reorganizing under Alan the Alien, who took over leadership after Thetis got his spine rearranged by Thrag during the previous war. Alan understood something critical. This wasn't going to end with a peace treaty. The Viltrumites, even reduced to a handful of survivors, would never stop, not while Thrag was breathing. So the Coalition mobilized everything they had left for what they openly acknowledged would be the final confrontation with Viltrumite civilization. Win or extinction. No middle ground. The battle itself was catastrophic, on a scale that makes previous conflicts look like warm-up rounds. Coalition forces clashed with Thrag's new army across the remnants of Viltrumite space, and the casualties were staggering on both sides. But the real nightmare was Thrag himself. He fought multiple Coalition champions simultaneously and won. Not barely, decisively. Omni-Man engaged him directly alongside Coalition forces, and Thrag systematically dismantled him. The guy was fighting entire teams of superhuman combatants at once, and treating it like cardio. The Coalition couldn't beat him in a straight fight. Nobody could. So they didn't try. Instead, they went for environmental destruction, igniting planetary cores and forcing total evacuation rather than attempting attempting a clean military victory. It's the galactic equivalent of flipping the table because you can't win the chess game. Effective? Absolutely. Elegant? Not even a little. When the dust settled, the Viltrumite species had been reduced to fewer than 10 survivors. 10, from an empire that once spanned the galaxy. But here's the kicker. One of those survivors was Thrag, the single most dangerous individual in the known universe, walked away from a war specifically designed to kill him. The Coalition threw everything they had at eliminating the Viltrumite threat forever, and the one Viltrumite who actually mattered was still alive, and now motivated by something far more dangerous than imperial ambition, vengeance. But if you think a galaxy-wide war was the worst thing Thrag had in him, wait until you see what happens when it gets personal. The final battle. Every war in this series, every betrayal, every genocide, every planet cracked in half, it all comes down to two guys floating in space trying to kill each other. Mark Grayson versus Grand Regent Thrag. 144 issues of buildup, and the payoff is exactly as brutal as you'd expect. Here's the thing about this fight. It's not close. Not at first. Thrag is the single most dangerous individual the Viltrumite species ever produced. The guy who consolidated an empire after civil war, who killed Thetis with his bare hands, who dismantled Coalition champions like they were made of wet paper. And when he gets his hands on Mark, he proves it. He rips Mark in half, not metaphorically. Thrag literally tears the protagonist of this 144-issue comic series in two, which is, not ideal. Mark should be dead by every reasonable metric. The fight is over. Thrag wins. The Viltrumite supremacist who believed weakness was a disease finally proved the half-human hybrid was exactly what he always said he was, inferior. Story over. Bad guys win. Go home. But Adam Eve doesn't let that happen. Her regenerative powers kick into overdrive. She doesn't just heal Mark. She rebuilds him stronger, pushes his capabilities to a level where he can actually stand toe-to-toe with Thrag. For the first time, it's competitive rather than an execution. And then both of them end up near a star. Not close in the way you're close to a campfire. Close in the way that stellar radiation is cooking them alive while they're still throwing punches. The environmental hazards alone should kill both of them. Neither one cares. Thrag is too proud to retreat, and Mark is too stubborn to die twice in the same fight. Mark flies out of that star. Thrag doesn't. The most powerful pure-blooded Viltrumite in history, the Grand Regent who survived the Great Purge, who rebuilt an army from nothing, burns to death in the heart of a star. There's something poetic about that for a guy with a god complex. The sun doesn't revolve around you, Thrag. It just kills you. And with Thrag's death, the Viltrumite threat ends. Not temporarily, permanently. After millennia of galactic terror, conquest, and wars that killed billions, it's done. Mark becomes the new leader of the surviving Viltrumite species. The half-human hybrid that pure Viltrumite ideology would have purged in the cradle now commands the entire race. He doesn't use that power to conquer. He commits to peaceful integration, redirecting the most dangerous species in the galaxy toward coexistence rather than domination. The series' final issue shows Mark sitting with his son, explaining the history of the Viltrumites. All of it. The wars, the purges, the violence that stretched across centuries. He's telling his kid this story so the kid understands why it has to stop. The empire that killed half its own people to achieve genetic perfection was ultimately led by the exact kind of person they would have exterminated. And his first act as leader was choosing mercy over strength. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.